If you're around my age, you'll probably have played either or both of one of these two game series growing up, and both the series were fantastic. They were kinda like the Sonic and Mario of the PS1 era, even though they were on the same console. Because I remember similar conversations on the playground about who was better, Spyro or Crash, kinda like how me and my friends used to argue if Sonic or Mario was better. They were both successful 3D platformers, so that seemed like it was enough to make them rivals in our eyes. So today I'm going to answer the question, who's better, Spyro the Dragon or Crash Bandicoot? Whoever I choose, I'm bound to piss someone off, so leave your rees down in the comments below. Since these two game series followed a very similar trajectory, I thought I would decide this battle by comparing and contrasting the two original trilogies of both these game series, and pick a winner from that. So let's see who has the better debut game. Let's start with Crash Bandicoot, released in 1996, a game that many people of my age fondly remember, and this was actually my first PS1 game, so I have a whole lot of nostalgia for it. But how does it hold up now, and how does it stack up against Spyro's debut outing? The intro sequence to this game has Cortex and his assistant trying to mutate Crash into the evil leader of their weird mutant animal army that they intend to take over the world with, for whatever reason. I mean, if I had a haircut like that and I was that small, I probably would want to conquer the world too to make up for it. Obviously they fail because Crash is too brain dead or whatever, and he escapes, and then we get this. What the fuck is that furry's dream come to life? Why does Crash look like this? And then why does this look like a furry porn star? She's like 3 foot taller than him. How does that even work? Goddamn Naughty Dog, you guys are fucked up, seriously. Jeez. And then Cortex says,
"Prepare the female Bandicoot."
I don't even want to know what he means by that. I thought this game was intended for children. I wonder how many kids got warped. See what I did there? And became furries because of this game. Maybe this is the patient zero of that whole culture. Bad Naughty Dog. Bad! After you've got that horrifying intro out of your mind, Crash is dropped onto an island and the game begins. The original Crash game kind of feels like a SNES game that's been put into 3D. You're working your way through levels and just trying to beat them. Collecting apples that you have to get 100 of to get a bonus life. Cough cough like someone else we know. And you also have boss battles that require you to jump on their heads 3 times. Cough cough like someone else we know. And you also have a power up that makes you invulnerable and makes you kill things by touch. Cough cough like someone else we know. And you're also jumping on turtles. Cough cough like someone else we know. The only real difference between this and say Donkey Kong Country is the fact that the levels are on a full 3D plane and it has a password system in it, kind of like an old SNES and Mega Drive game would. This really does feel like the weird Neanderthal link between the new and old platformers. But to be honest, in the early days of PS1, sometimes a lot of people didn't have memory cards yet. These fuckers were expensive, believe it or not, so it was kind of nice to have the option of a password system. Unlike an old 2D platformer though, you have the whole 3D plane to worry about in this game. Sometimes the camera will be behind Crash, sometimes he'll be running towards it, those levels are annoying, and sometimes the camera will go side on like a classic platformer, and this really does help with keeping up the variety and stops everything from getting too stale. And you also get some levels where you're riding a boar. God, look at Crash's face behind this boar's butt. What's he gonna do to that poor boar? But a level that definitely isn't fun is this goddamn level here. Everyone remembers this level, with the fucking annoying spinning platforms that you constantly have to redo every time you fall down. God, this bit is so annoying, it was infamous among me and my friends. And the bit directly after it is just as hard. Jesus, this is one of the more annoying levels in the game. Crash gets a jump and a Tasmanian devil-like spin to hit his enemies with. Sure, it's a simple arsenal, but they're both fun enough to use. They both feel responsive and fun to use. Well, most of the time. Sure, sometimes you'll feel like you definitely hit the attack or jump button, but nothing happened. But this doesn't happen all too often, so it's not that big a deal. The levels all have a nice flow to them. Well, when you're doing well anyway, you get into this sort of lovely zen state, but when you're doing bad, you get fucking angry, because this game is one tough son of a bitch, and I am talking Nintendo level hard. But once you get all the patterns down on a bit you've been stuck on for so goddamn long, it's so satisfying just to breeze through even though you went through hell to get there. But it never feels unfairly difficult. It's one of those games that makes you feel like it's your fault when you die. Well, most of the time anyway. I'm glad that the game went for a fixed camera instead of a moving organic camera like in other 3D platformers of the time, as the cameras in games like Spyro really were a problem at points, but that doesn't mean the camera is perfect, as sometimes the way the level's designed will block your view and get you killed, which is incredibly annoying. The boss battles definitely help to break up the levels, and they don't really pose as much of a problem as the normal levels do, but they're fun nevertheless. The graphics and music are awesome for the time. Who doesn't remember the iconic tunes in this game? Whenever I hear them, I get transported back in time for a magical nostalgia portal. As with the debut Spyro game, I feel this game hasn't quite aged as well as the other games in the series, but given the context of when it was released, it's a pretty awesome game. It has a hard as nails difficulty that the later games do not have, which really makes me think of SNES games, and I find its difficulty more appealing as an adult. It's just the right amount of challenging. It's annoying at times, but not so crazily difficult that you want to stop playing. Some of the tighter platforms that you have to jump on can be a right pain in the arse, but most of the platforming feels fluid and fun, and it's a really good game that I have some really nice memories of playing with my family. But is it better than Spyro's debut game? Spyro the Dragon, released way back in 1998, a few months before the final game in the Crash Bandicoot series, Warped, would be released, but it's a pretty damn good debut game that was given a lot of critical praise when it was released, and it went on to sell nearly 5 million units. Damn! At the start of the game, you're given this cutscene that sets the game up, and you're treated to some mighty fine voice work by the powerful Clancy Brown, who has literally the best voice ever, and Carlos, name I'm not even going to try and pronounce, who you may know from Rocko's Modern Life. The talent in this opening really helps in letting you know that you're in for a fun Sunday morning cartoon-like adventure. In this cutscene, Spyro and his dragon bros are getting interviewed by some TV crew, seemingly so this old guy can brag about how much loot he's got.
We now have 12,000 treasure, or is it 14,000?
Actually, who the fuck's watching this interview? I've played through this whole game. There ain't no houses or TVs in this world, other than the one that Ganasty Gadork is watching on. Are they just live streaming it straight to him to prank him and start a war? Cocky bastards. After that, my homeboy Clancy Brown Dragon lays this sick burn down on Ganasty Gnork.
I'll take that question. Nasty Nork is a simple creature. Simple! He has been contained in a remote world and is no threat to the Dragon Kingdom. No threat! Besides, he is ugly.
He loses his shit and turns everyone into crystal except for Spyro. Convenient. And it's Spyro's job to free everyone and get that old guy's loot back. Right, all that's fine. It's meant to be a silly Sunday morning cartoon intro, but if Ganasty Gnork could just literally freeze all his enemies in one go, why didn't he just do that in the first place? Why did he need to be provoked? It sounded like they had a war at some point. Ugh, what am I doing? Why am I questioning the plot to a Spyro game? What am I doing with my life? After this, you're pretty much straight into the action and you're able to do what you want and go wherever you want and do whatever you want in what order. And I appreciate that, because these days, in modern games, you'd be made to do an extensive 50-hour tutorial area. Sure, as you collect and free your Dragon Bros, you get little tips on how to do things, but it never feels overly hand-holdy, which is nice. Basically, Spyro the Dragon is a giant collectathon, kind of like Banjo-Kazooie. You're given a hub world with a bunch of other levels on it, and you've got to work your way to the set amount of stuff so you can move on to another hub world with more levels on. It's pretty simple stuff, really. If you're a completionist, this game is definitely for you, as you've got a screen that shows you how many gems and dragons there are for you to collect on each level, and finding those last few gems you need to 100% a level is goddamn infuriating and definitely not for me. I've never been the completionist type. I like to just get what I need and move on, have my fun. Every level has its own set of dragons to free, and every time you get one you get a little cutscene with the freed dragon, and these are essentially the main thing you need to collect to move on in the game, kind of like the stars in Mario 64. Every hub world has a little balloonist that will have a set number of something you need to have completed before you can move on to the next set of worlds. The other thing you can collect throughout the levels are dragon eggs that have been stolen by these weird blue mummy looking motherfuckers. These gits used to drive me fucking mental when I was a kid, and they still kinda do now. I get instantly angered as soon as I hear that fucking noise. God, I hate these cunts so much. Get back here and let me kill you, baby stealing cunt. So yeah, not a big fan of these bastards. You have two attacks at your disposal, a running horn ram move and a fire breathing move that you can use to dispatch of your enemies with. You get some enemies that are immune to certain attacks, so you have to switch up your attacks, which is pretty simple, but it's quite satisfying to kill your enemies in this game, especially when you kill someone with a headbutt and they go flying. You also have a gliding jump that you can use. This is always a lot of fun to use, especially when you're flying around from the top of a high level. Although the attacks and the jumping are quite fun and well implemented, they're also somewhat sullied by the bloody terrible camera controls, which really cause a whole lot of problems in this game. A lot of the time you'll be getting hit by enemies that you can barely see because you can't get the camera to do what you want it to do. And sometimes you'll be trying to platform or just walk around and you'll fall off a ledge into an instant death trap, which is fucking annoying. The difficulty of the game shouldn't come from you dying because you can't see what you're doing because the camera is shit. Sure, most of the games at the time were like this, and it was a land before analog sticks were a standard. I forget that I played most of my games on my old PS1 controller, right up until I got an analog controller so I could play Ape Escape, but it doesn't stop it from being fucking annoying. But that's not the only problem in this first entry of the series, as I kind of feel like the controls are, to be honest, a little bit wank. It feels a little bit jittery, especially when you're trying to use your ram attack or just trying to jump on tiny platforms. And when you combine these jittery controls with the bad camera, it can cause some real fucking problems sometimes. When you're trying to do stuff, it can kind of feel like you've got tank controls, which is a bit of an issue in a 3D platformer. But it's not so bad that you can't get over it, and it doesn't ruin the whole game or anything. Another thing I think hasn't aged quite so well is the level design. Not all the levels are really bad, but a lot of them are quite badly designed, as the levels just don't feel like they flow that well, and sometimes you're left thinking, where the fuck do I go? Which pisses me off sometimes. I feel like the later games did this a whole lot better, but again, the levels are still fun, it just feels like an unnecessary hurdle. But one area that has certainly stood the test of time is the amazing music that was done by Stuart Copeland of The Police, who does this weird keyboard kind of proggy rock sounding stuff that has that iconic Spyro the Dragon keyboard sound. The songs definitely are catchy as fuck. While this is a fun debut game from the Purple Dragon, it definitely has some areas that haven't aged too well, but it doesn't stop it from being a fun time. I still had a giant smile on my face the whole time I was playing this game, when I wasn't battling with the cunty camera. Anyway, let's see how the first Crash Bandicoot game holds up and decide who has the best debut game. While I feel that both games are flawed, but still really fun games to play, I'm gonna have to go with Crash Bandicoot as the superior debut game. Spyro the Dragon's poor camera controls and bad level design really hold it back from winning this battle, as it just doesn't feel as good as the original Crash Bandicoot does with its smooth controls and slick design. So that's 1 point for Crash Bandicoot. Now let's see who has the best second game. This is going to be a tough one for me, as the second game in both these trilogies are my favourite. Spyro the Dragon 2, Gateway to Glimmer, or Ripto's Rage if you're in America. God knows why the titles are different. This game is definitely without a doubt my favourite Spyro the Dragon game. It just sanded down all the rough edges that the original game had and made it a perfect little 3D platformer. This game starts with Spyro and Sparks lamenting about the shit weather. I know how you feel, guys. I live in England and I can confirm that it's always shit and it's always raining here too. And you'll notice that Spyro's voice actor has changed since the first game. He's now voiced by the legendary Tom Kenny of SpongeBob fame, and he does a fantastic job. And so they decide to go on holiday to Dragon Shores to get away from it all. But of course, this holiday does not go as planned, as a scientist in the world of Avalar has summoned Spyro to help defeat a baddie called Ripto, that they for some reason accidentally summoned because of their idiot friend Hunter. Look, I know Hunter is stupid, and all that, but I don't get why everyone constantly hates on him like he's the worst thing ever. Growing up, I used to like him as a character. He's charmingly stupid. Sure, he kind of looks like a weird furry version of Tommy Pickles from the Rugrats with seemingly no teeth, but I don't get the online hate towards him. He's like the Spyro series Jar Jar Binks. Poor Hunter. As soon as Spyro is summoned, Ripto turns up and destroys his only way of getting back to the Dragon World, so Spyro agrees to help out so he can get back home. Poor Spyro. All the poor little bastard wanted was a fucking holiday. I know how he feels. And then after this intro, you're thrown straight into the game's first level, and this time out there's been some improvements on basically everything I moaned about that was wrong from the first game, and that's why this is such a good sequel. It just feels super polished. The basic formula of the game basically remains unchanged from the first game. Instead of freeing frozen dragons, you're now collecting weird green gem things that you need to power your portal back home, and you're also trying to collect a talisman for every level, which you get by simply completing the level. These are essentially your main quests and side quests for every level. This time out, the levels feel a whole lot better to play on. In the first game you felt like you were constantly getting lost and spinning your wheels, but in this game the levels for the most part just flow a whole lot better and feel a whole lot more organic, but they still don't feel completely linear like Crash does. Spread across the different levels are random little side quests that all reward you with these little green gem things, and these really mix up the Spyro formula and stop things from getting too stale, as all these quests have completely different setups. You might be using power-ups to do things, or you might just be playing ice hockey with Yetis. That has got to be my favourite set of side quests in the game. I love ice hockey. I mean, it's not exactly NHL level play, but it's fun nevertheless. These little side quests almost feel like something you would get in an open world RPG, and it's definitely one of my favourite bits of the game. Spyro also has a few new moves up his sleeve in this game. You get fluttering, climbing up ladders, swimming. Alright, these things do sound pretty lame on paper, but they really do give a few added levels to the gameplay. Being able to swim is a real godsend, because in the first game you'd basically instantly die if you fell in the water, which was super annoying. But to get these amazing powers, you've got to buy them from money bags.
Spyro, you see this wall here? I bet you're dying to know what's on the other side. If only I had a few more gems, I might be able to remember how to lower the wall.
This little fuck will be fleecing you for money throughout the whole game, so you can learn to swim, climb, and all that jazz. Money bags kind of reminds me of Top Hat Gaming Man for some reason. Maybe it's the vast wealth and the way he talks. I do like that the older levels have areas that you can't access until you have these new abilities, which later on opens up new quests for you to do, which is pretty cool. They've also added in proper boss battles, which is a really nice addition, but sadly there's not that much to these boss battles and they're pretty damn easy, but they're a nice way of bookending the areas. Thank the Lord this game sorted out the first game's jittery controls and terrible camera controls. Sure, it's still not perfect, but it feels a whole lot better than the first game. The amount of times the camera gets you killed is considerably lower this time, which is nice. And the music duties are still handled by Stuart Copeland, and yet again, he does an absolutely killer job. This game is definitely miles better than the first Spyro game, and it's still my favourite to this day. It just feels like it got everything perfectly right. It just has the right amount of different mission types and level variety with some great controls, fun characters, and great charming voice acting. Sure, it's a whole lot easier than the first game, but the first game's difficulty was more based on the cheap annoying stuff than actual fun challenge, and this game is just so chill and relaxing to play. I love just cruising about trying to beat all the levels. Anyway, let's see how well it fares against the second game in the Crash series. Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back is my favourite Crash Bandicoot game, and it's superior to its predecessor in pretty much every way, and much like the Spyro game I just talked about, it corrected all the mistakes from its debut game. It's kind of weird how these two series follow a very similar pattern. This game starts with Cortex's defeat by Crash at the end of the first game, and you'll notice something amazing about Cortex's voice. Yes, it's Clancy Brown. Weird, he's in games in both the series I'm going to talk about today, and he still has the best voice ever. Basically, Cortex finds some crystals he can use to conquer the world, but he needs a whole bunch of them and he has no way of getting them for some reason. Why he can't just use one of his many minions to get the crystals, I do not know, but he decides to trick Crash into collecting all the crystals for him, because, you know, Crash is a little bit thick.
Right, Maury. Let's try again, shall we? This is called adding. If I have 2 beans, and then I add 2 more beans, what do I have?
Some beans.
And also, who the hell is this? Crash has a sister now? What the hell happened to his furry's wet dream girlfriend that was 5 foot taller than him? Who cares, I guess, the developers obviously didn't. She sends Crash off to get some batteries for her laptop, and Cortex kidnaps Crash and convinces him to help him gather the crystals he needs. Right, just one more question about Cortex's plan. If he wants Crash to succeed, why does he make him fight his cronies? Surely that's counterproductive to Crash getting the stuff he needs. Why am I questioning this? There's no point. It makes about as much sense as a Welsh road sign. Who am I to question the brilliance of Clancy Brown Cortex? This time out, instead of opting for the old school Mario styled overworld with levels on it, you're given a bunch of rooms with levels to work your way through. Beat all the levels and collect at the very least each level's pink crystal, and you can move on to that floor's boss. Pretty simple really. There's 2 other gems that you can get throughout the levels that will give you extra levels if you can be bothered to collect them all. They're too much of a pain in the ass for me personally to even bother with. It feels like they've tightened up the controls in the first game, as everything just feels a whole lot nicer to control. It's completely slick, and Crash is given a little slide kick to use that you can use to get a slightly higher leap if you jump at the end of it. You also get a belly flop move for taking out stuff that's too tough for you to simply take out of normal jumps. And the controls aren't the only thing that feel a whole lot smoother. The levels feel a whole lot more polished and refined, and there's no nightmare levels like the Fortress from the first game. A lot of the depth perception based jumping problems have been cleaned up from the first game, which is nice, because missing jumps due to this in the first game was always a pain in the fucking ass. But as a result of this slicker, smoother level design, the whole game feels a lot easier and less frustrating to play, which has its own pros and cons, but I overall prefer this game's level of difficulty, as it does still have some challenging levels, but there isn't any that are so annoying that it's not even fun to play anymore, like some of the more annoying levels in the first game. The hog levels have been replaced with levels where you ride this fucking adorable little polar bear, which is awesome. Look at his sassy little bastard face. But they've also added in levels where you have to ride on this annoying watercraft thing that is pretty much impossible to control with the D-pad for some reason. It took me a few deaths to realise that it's basically unplayable unless you use the analog stick. I can't be the only one who plays these games with the D-pad rather than the analog stick, because these levels caused me a lot of frustration back in the day because I only had access to a non-analog controller, but it does control well enough with an analog stick. It's just a weird little control quirk. But apart from this stuff, it's pretty much identical to the original game. It's just the original game on steroids with basically all the bad things from the original gone. And I still have a whole lot of fun playing through this game now. Definitely the best Crash Bandicoot game in my opinion. But is it better than Spyro the Dragon 2, Gateway to Glimmer? This was a really hard decision to make, quite honestly, as these 2 games are 2 of my favourite PS1 games, and I have a lot of fond memories with both, and they're both basically perfect games. But I'm sorry, I think I'm going to have to go with Spyro the Dragon 2, Gateway to Glimmer. Just because of how much better it is than the first game in the Spyro series. I spent hundreds of hours playing this game growing up, 100%ing all the levels and enjoying all the game's wacky characters and trying to beat all the side quests. And god is there some really hard ones. It was a really hard choice, as both of these games are fucking amazing. Anyway, it's 1-1 in the overall scores, so let's take a look at the third games in both of these trilogies to see who's going to come out on top. Spyro, Year of the Dragon. The third entry in the much venerated series, and while I think it's not as good as the second game, I still think it's a pretty good entry into the series. It's definitely better than the first game. Year of the Dragon opens up with all the Dragon Bros and Hunter having a little nap. Then suddenly some bitch with a bunch of rhinos breaks in and steals all their babies. Who does that? That's as black and white evil as the awful villains in The Last Jedi.
Why'd you run out on me? Because you're not quite evil enough.
Then the gang is awoken because the girl has stepped on Hunter's tail, and then a Benny Hill sketch ensues. Then the bad guys escape because some fat cunt blocks up the hole with his massive fat ass. Stupid git. Then coincidentally the hole is not big enough to fit the rest of the big buff boy dragons in, so they send little boy Spyro and Hunter the special needs cat in to do their dirty work for them. Then you're again off on an adventure to stop some cartoon villain who is this weird dinosaur looking rhino thing this time. Have you noticed how Hunter and the cat girl look very similar?
Say, is it just me, or is she kind of cute when she's angry?
Ugh, I don't even want to think about the thought of Hunter having sex. I bet some furry on the internet has already drew this up. I really don't want to know. But they do look awfully similar. I hope it doesn't end up being a Luke and Leia situation. To be honest with you, Year of the Dragon really does feel like more of the same, but a little bit worse. As in the process of trying to add new stuff to the series, they've actually added things that I feel made the game worse than the second entry in the series. It kind of feels like they were running out of ideas, so they just came up with a bunch of stupid random ideas and put them in the game. For example, the skateboarding minigame in the first level. God, this controls so fucking badly. I remember liking this as a kid. What the fuck was my retarded child brain thinking? This section sucks, especially when you've got to hit all the lizards in a time limit without falling off the board, which is really easy to do because of the crap skateboarding controls. And for the sake of it, they've added a bunch of extra playable characters into the mix to try and mix up the gameplay, and I'm sorry, but it really doesn't work. Most of the designs are just uninspired and pretty much all the characters control bloody awfully. They're like controlling Spyro but not as good. For example, take Shayla the kangaroo. Yes, most of the characters are that on the nose. I mean, listen to this fucking awful Aussie accent.
I hope you appreciate this favor I'm doing in letting you out.
That's good of you, mate. No hard feelings, eh?
Right. After all, I'm just doing my job.
It sounds awful to me, but I'd have to get a real Aussie to have a listen and tell me how offensively bad it is. Hopefully my buddy the Great Southern Gamer can let me know how shit it is. If it's anything like the Penguin's English accent, I'm pretty sure it's fucking bad.
I have to train the hummingbirds. They must be in peak physical condition if we're going to take on the sorceress.
Sheila controls like Spyro, but without a flame breath or ram attack, just a terrible laggy kick move that is hard to aim, and the sad thing is most of these extra characters feel like this. They feel unfinished and half-baked. Don't even get me started on the levels of the Penguin, they do my fucking head in. You're flying around shooting rockets at people, which sounds awesome in theory, right? But it isn't. They've implemented the controls so awfully. You always miss what you're trying to hit and you bump into walls, and it just pales in comparison to the lovely control of Spyro. And it just makes me think, what were they thinking? Top Hat Gaming Man turns up again in this game, but this time he's moved on from teaching you simple moves for mental money, and now he's moved into the lucrative business of enslaving animals and then forcing you to pay for their release.
What a sucker. That is, it's a far, far better thing you do today, Spyro, than you have ever done, and, well, so forth, etc. You get the idea.
Jesus, he got evil in between these games. I know he was just a money-hungry git in the last game, but now he's in the slave trade. What a turn. While I'm sounding very negative on the game, I do still really love it. It has some quite annoying parts, but the rest of the game is your usual Spyro the Dragon awesomeness. So the bad bits aren't enough to ruin the game fully for me. It just feels like they had a bit of franchise fatigue going on. And this game ended the original trilogy of games, and while some of the games are flawed, they're all pretty damn good and all hold up surprisingly well for 3D mascot platformers. But is this game good enough to beat Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped and help Spyro win the battle? I don't know, let's find out. Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, the last game in the classic Crash Bandicoot series, and it's a game that actually surprised me a great deal. I remember having quite mixed feelings on the game as a kid, but playing it now, I fucking love it. Not as much as I love to, but pretty close. This game opens with a cutscene of a comet hitting the Earth and the great evil Uka Uka being released, being voiced by Clancy Brown yet again, so now he's voicing both the bad guys. What a badass. The gang gets wind of this through the, Force, I guess?
I felt a great disturbance in the Force, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced. I fear something terrible has happened.
and they all retreat like pussies into the house. Then Clancy Brown proceeds to shout at himself for a minute or so, then they enlist the help of some sort of Time Lord, then the gang stops being pussies, and they finally spring into action to take them down again. What I want to know is, how the hell did they get into space? Did they have their own portal or spaceship? Why am I asking questions? I should have learned by now. It's a Crash Bandicoot game. The story makes no fucking sense. It might not be Shakespeare, but at least this time it makes some more fucking sense than the last game. Much like Spyro's third outing, this Crash game basically has just rehashed the second game in the series, but with a few serious fatigue features that dilute the perfect formula down. But when you have a formula as good as Crash Bandicoot's, it doesn't even matter if you bugger up a few elements, you still have a fun game on your hands. Everything feels about the same as it did in the second game, except the graphics look a little bit more dapper, but that's about it. It still controls smooth and slick. When something ain't broke, you ain't gotta fix it. This time round, you're again getting the pink crystals and the other little gems you need for bonus stuff, but this time added into the mix are relics that require you to do a level a second time as quick as you possibly can, with a set time that you've got to beat. As with a lot of long-running series, Naughty Dog ran out of ideas and decided to put vehicle levels in, and I don't have a problem with driving levels if they're implemented well, but the fact of the matter is these ones just aren't. The jet ski levels handle like absolute shit, it's so stiff and not fun to use, and the same goes for the motorbike level. It controls so badly, you just want these levels to be over as soon as possible. It kind of feels like these levels were just rushed into the game to make up level space. It just feels like a lot of the levels are rushed, but maybe I'm just being too harsh and holding it up too closely to the standards of my favourite, the second game. But all things considered, this game is definitely a lot better than I remember. Sure, it's a little bit on the easy side, but it's kind of like a Kirby game in that regard. It's just a fun little romp that keeps a smile on your face while you play it. It's a game that doesn't mess with the winning Crash Bandicoot formula too much, but the little tweaks they've made definitely aren't for the better. But it's still a great game. It's a worthy end to the original trilogy of Crash games, and it holds up very well for what it is. But did it do enough to beat out Spyro's third outing? Well, let's see. I love both these games, but I will openly admit that they both have problems that are mainly caused by the fact that they both wanted to innovate and change up their formulas, and the things they added just ended up making the games worse in my opinion, but it doesn't ruin either game. After I play both of these games again for the first time in years, I've got to say I'm gonna have to give the win to Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, as it just made a whole lot less mistakes than Spyro Year of the Dragon. Before I started making this video, I was thinking I would end up giving the win to Spyro, whose games I remember liking more, and I still think Spyro the Dragon 2 Gateway to Glimmer is the best out of all these games. But when it comes to overall quality, Crash just edges out Spyro in my opinion. The new characters in Year of the Dragon really sours things for me, as they couldn't implement them in a way that was actually fun. Crash Bandicoot 3 Warp certainly feels like it played it safe in many regards, but it really works in its favour, as Crash Bandicoot playing it safe is better than most people on a good day. So there you have it. I think Crash Bandicoot is the winner. Not the result even I was expecting going into this video, but there you go. I think in the future I'd like to do some more videos like this. If you have any suggestions for future matchups, put them in the comments below, and thank you for watching, and I will see you later.